Hey everyone, welcome back. So a few weeks ago, I attempted to refinish my shower walls and the end result was not what I wanted. I had several mistakes during the process and overall the finish just did not come out looking correct. So in this video, I'm going to attempt to fix my shower walls. So the first part of this process is going to be sanding the walls down entirely. So I don't need to remove all the black paint essentially that's on the walls, but what I do need to do is level them out again because I have areas where it's uneven, especially up towards the top and into the edges because the product essentially started to run down the walls and it dried that way. So I've got bubbles along the edges and then I actually just had air bubbles scattered all throughout. Now I can live with the air bubbles, but I do need to fix all the areas where it ran down the walls and dried that way. At this point, I am done with the sanding. I removed all the air bubbles and removed the areas where the material started to run and form ridges. So what I need to do now is clean all the walls off. Now, unlike when I prep the surface for the material, I do not want to use Ajax or Comet or any sort of abrasive cleaner. So the company states that if you use an abrasive cleaner on this, you could damage the material. Now, of course, I have just sanded it, so I could go through and use that, but I don't want to damage it any more than I have to. So I'm just going to use a soft liquid detergent, basically dish soap, to clean off the residue, and there is quite a bit of dust residue on the surface. Alright guys, at this point I'm going to attempt to use the Bathworks kit again to refinish the walls. So at this point I have sanded everything down, removed those high areas and cleaned the walls off. Now I'm going to use a tack cloth, wipe the surface down, remove any dust or debris that's still there, and then we're going to go into using the liquid primer and getting into applying the Bathworks kit again. Alright, at this point I am ready to apply the liquid primer, which they tell you to apply with a paper towel. Now last time I did this, I used a paper towel. I didn't find any issues. I was a little worried about like some residue being left on the walls. I didn't see any problem. It didn't seem to cause any issues when I applied the refinishing paint. So I'm going to keep to this method. This stinks really bad. So last time I just used a normal face mask, completely worthless. I've got my respirator over here, so I'm going to be using that. So I'm not going to talk during these next couple of steps just because it's going to be difficult to understand me with the respirator on. But you absolutely want a respirator, or you, at minimum, you need to have a high amount of airflow to get fresh oxygen in and get the smell of this out of here. Because this smells bad and then the refinishing paint smells really bad. Now once you apply this, they tell you to wait 5 minutes. So I'll do that, and during that time process, I will be prepping the refinishing paint. Okay guys, I'm going to try to make this pretty quick because the liquid primer is still drying and frankly it smells pretty bad. And last time, by the end of this project, I had a freaking headache from the fumes. So what we've got here is the mixing container, and inside the mixing container is our refinishing paint, and then we have the hardener. So this is a resin-based paint basically, so kind of like an epoxy, very similar. Once you combine this, you have a set working time of around 2 to 3 hours, they say. What I found last time was that I did not really have 2 to 3 hours. I found that within about an hour to an hour and a half, so which was about the time I was finishing up, it was already starting to get really thick and difficult to work with. Now again, that 2 to 3 hour time frame, okay, I was pushing the 2 hour mark, but I would expect at least like 2.5 hours, you know, calling it between the 2 and 3 hour mark. So I should have still had like 60 minutes to work with the product. And really at the point I was at best 90 minutes of working, I did not have another 60 minutes to work with this product. So I'm only gonna mix half of this together. So I'm gonna use a separate container here. I'm gonna pour half of my refinishing paint in here, half of the hardener, because so long as they're not combined, they're fine. Pour it into here, use what I need. If I need more of it, I'll make more, but I don't want it hardening while I'm still trying to do like cutting basically in the corners and stuff. So I'll make half of it at a time, use it up, and then if I need more at the end, then I'll make the remaining half. If I don't need it and everything looks good, then what I'm probably gonna do is I'm going to set it aside, let this dry overnight, and then come back in 24, maybe 48 hours, and then apply the remaining half, if it's still left over, to any areas that I feel need a bit more, if there's any sort of touch up to do still, or just to use it up. The shower walls are now done and the paint is fully cured. Now, the final result looks a lot better than what it did the first time I did it, but there's still some issues. So some of the areas that I really focused on sanding off to remove those problems from the first attempt, they still kind of shine through now that the second layer, now that I've refinished again, is done. And that's just really because I probably didn't sand enough and I should have done more to remove that material from those troublesome spots. Also, I still have roller lines. It's not as visible on the side areas, but with the lighting, you can definitely see it on this one. You probably can't see it in the camera, but there's some roller marks that are still here. I don't know what to do to remove those. Maybe it needed more material. I wasn't putting enough material on the roller. That's a possibility. But ultimately I'm just gonna have to live with them because I was not able to remove them even with my second attempt. I will say there's less this time, so that is a bonus. And then I still have a small area over here where I have some air bubbles. I started rolling over on this section, so I think the problem here was that the roller was not fully saturated, even though I dipped it quite a bit and rolled it out in the tray. I think it just hadn't fully soaked in the material yet, and so when I went to apply the paint, there was just some air bubbles still left in it, and so I had those problems right here. All right, so despite those three issues, I still have areas where I had problems the first time still show through, the roller marks and some small sections of air bubbles. Everything else came out pretty good, and if I had had the lessons learned from the first time and I was applying it to maybe a different bathroom where I was starting from scratch, then I think overall it would look really good in here. But of course in this case I was starting on one where I had already attempted to use this product and it just wasn't a fresh start basically. But some of those lessons learned were the instructions say when you want to get into like the corners that you should use a dab application. So they want you to take the brush and dab the product onto the wall, and of course make sure you have a fair amount of product on there so that you're not going too light because it needs to dry in that kind of like thick layer. I found that left a lot of that caused a lot of my issues from the first time where I had product, the paint started to drip down the wall or it left air bubbles and stuff. So this time I decided not to do that, and for all the areas that I need to get into, I would apply enough product to one edge, enough of the paint, and then I would apply it on and pull it just a little bit. And I did that for all the edges here and into the corners. There was far less issues. I didn't have any issue at all, in fact, with the paint running down the walls. I didn't have any air bubbles caused by that method. On these flat surfaces right here on the kind of like the trim edge, It did leave a bit of a wavy pattern, but it was consistent all throughout, and I'm okay with that because it turned out way better looking than what it did the first time. All right, moving on to the next lesson learned, another big one, and they do tell you in the instructions, do not shake the paint bottle. I accidentally shook mine before opening it during the first application process, just a few times. I kind of forgot. I was so used to kind of shaking paint. Other times when I've allowed it to sit for a very long period of time, I'll shake the can and then I'll go into stirring. This is one where you really don't want to do that. If you happen to shake the bottle before opening it, I would highly recommend do not open at that point and let it sit for a while so that it can settle and just get those air bubbles out, because I think that caused most of my air bubbles in my product the first time around, because this time I did not shake it. I opened it, I slowly poured it out and combined the two materials, and I did that very carefully so as not to get excess air in, and I had essentially no problems. The only issue again was up here in the corner, and I think that was because it was just the first place I was starting and the roller just wasn't fully saturated with paint. Another major change I did this time around, which I think ultimately affected the outcome, was I only mixed together half of the paint and hardener at one time. So I tried my best to make sure that I was keeping an equal ratio of both, but I mixed together one half and I only used that, and once I used it up, I then poured the remaining contents together, mixed those together, so that because I'm keeping them separated and I'm only doing that half at a time, my product isn't sitting there in the paint tray starting to dry and harden, because you're on a clock. You're only supposed to have 2 to 3 hours to use it up. So this way, I mixed together that first half, I got my 2 to 3 hours to use that first amount available to me, and then when I need the second half, I mix it together and I'm resetting that clock again. Now, of course, if you're using the same roller and same foam brush, that product is still drying on there. I did not swap them out because I just wasn't having any issues with my brushes and foam roller at the time, but you could of course swap those to make sure that everything you're starting with is fresh for that second amount when you need it. Ultimately, I was just trying to make sure that material wasn't drying in my paint tray, and I think I definitely noticed a big difference as far as the workability of the product towards the end. It didn't take me as long this time, but I made sure that I wasn't having to fight the product to get it onto the wall correctly this time. Ultimately, my recommendation is I do not intend to use this product again. I've used it twice now, and I had some lessons learned, and if I were to use it again, it would definitely look better than I think the current result does. But I do not see it coming out looking the way I envision it to. It's not going to be a perfect, because again, right now, I don't see how I can remove the roller marks. I could probably be doing everything perfect for 99% of the project and still end up with that small chance where you make a mistake and I still end up with roller lines in the final product. So that's a big reason for me to not recommend it, because I just don't see it achieving a perfect result. If someone out there has a lot of experience using this product, maybe they can, but as a DIYer, I just really don't see you using this once or twice and achieving a perfect result. I'm okay with it and leaving it like this for now, because this bathroom is upstairs and basically no one is ever gonna see it. But if this were like a primary bathroom, especially on like the first floor of your house where guests could see it if they were over, because maybe it was the only guest bathroom available, you probably wouldn't want them to walk in and see your shower walls and not seeing an absolutely perfect finished product. So in the end, my recommendation is I would not buy this product unless you are a very experienced DIYer and knows what you're doing and knows how to use this product in particular. If sharing my experience was helpful to you, please give a thumbs up. If you have any experience with this product, any tips and recommendations, leave those in the comments below. You might be able to help other DIYers who are interested in trying this product themselves. That's all for now. I'll see you next time on the DIY Grunt.